from the Digital Media Center on the campus of Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. This is Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate level English language learners. Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
Welcome to Ramping Up Your English. This is episode 2, segment 1. Remember which freight car this is? It was mentioned in the video clips in the last episode. It's called a gondola. There are no doors on the side, no chutes on the bottom for unloading. It's not a real tall car, and this example is very long. You'll see a full-size gondola in some of our video clips today. In our previous episode, we introduced this program and began building the foundation for future instruction by introducing our theme for this first unit. The theme is trains and railroads. I suggested starting a notebook. Here are the things we put in the notebook during the previous episode. We made a list of sights and sounds from the first video clip. You could have used your home language if you chose. The idea here is to activate your previous knowledge about the theme. In the second segment, I had viewers watch a video clip and estimate about how much of the narration they understood. We started a word list from another video clip, choosing nouns that help us build our foundation for the theme of trains and railroads. Then we looked at those words and used some strategies to find their meanings. Finally, we added more words. We'll work with these later in the program. Right now, we're going to view a video clip on freight trains. Your assignment is to watch and see how much you understand. Let's watch Freight Trains, Part 1.
Freight trains. The United States has more of them than passenger trains. Freight is an English word that refers to anything that is carried from one place to another. Freight trains carry things on rails. This freight train is being pulled through Eugene, Oregon by locomotives. Can you count the locomotives on this train? Locomotive is another word for engine. It's the power that makes a train move. These diesel-electric locomotives are hitched together. This train requires 4 locomotives. The wagons pulled by locomotives are called cars. These cars are carrying wood products, one of Oregon's industries. These are perhaps the best known of the cars on a freight train, box cars. They have doors on the sides. There's a series of books called The Boxcar Children about kids who live in a boxcar. In the past, people used to board empty boxcars to travel. Behind these boxcars, this freight train is pulling tank cars. They carry liquids and are cylinder-shaped. Now back to cars that are carrying wood products. In English, we can use the words made up of to describe something with more than one part. For example, you could say that this train is made up of locomotives, boxcars, and tank cars. You could use more advanced English. Instead of saying is made up of, you could say consists of. In fact, the word consist is used in railroading as a noun by shifting the accent to the front of the word. this train has a consist of locomotives, boxcars, and tank cars. Now we see utility poles carried on flat cars. Now, more wood products. Here's an empty flat car, followed by a gondola. And now we see lumber cars. These are the same things that had the wood products on them, only now they're not covered and you can see that it's carrying lumber. These cars are also called skeleton cars. Last two cars are called hopper cars. They unload from the bottom. Notice there's no doors on the side. And this is the last car on this freight train, and there's a red light at the back of it so that it can be seen as the back of the train. The yellow locomotives tell us that this is a Union Pacific train. This is a Union Pacific freight train traveling along the south bank of the Columbia River, which forms the border between Oregon and Washington. What kinds of train cars can you recognize on this train?
Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate level English learners. I'm John Letts. You're watching Episode 2, Segment 1. Let's use the video clip you just saw to introduce our first English language function. If you missed the previous video, you can watch it on letscreate.org. Choose Episode 2, Segment 1 to find the clip. A basic language function that's easy to ramp up is that of describing an object. And nothing shows the world your limits in English more than always using the same basic words to describe something. We're describing a freight train by listing its parts. If you've reached the intermediate level, you can do this by saying a freight train has a locomotive, lumber cars, boxcars, tank cars, hopper cars, and a gondola. And that is perfectly correct English. If you want to ramp up your English higher, you can use the phrase is made up of instead of has, and add some descriptive words in terms like this. Try this one. A freight train is made up of 4 locomotives, many lumber cars, and some box cars, tank cars, hopper cars, and a gondola. Even better, use the word consists of. A freight train consists of 4 locomotives, many lumber cars, some box cars, tank cars, hopper cars, and a gondola. It's a small change, but you'll come across as more fluent in the language. Another tip. We started sentences with a freight train, and nothing wrong with that, but it's a little too general. Not every train has those cars. It works better to identify the train. So we're going to do that right now. And so what we have is the freight train I see consists of 4 locomotives, many lumber cars, and you can continue on with the sentence. Now, think of other objects you can describe by listing their parts. Some suggestions: your bedroom, a car, your outfit, your classroom. Make some sentences describing these or other objects by listing their parts. Don't worry about listing every part. You're practicing the language, not your knowledge base. Do as many of these sentences as you want for your homework. And that's all for Segment 1 of Episode 2. We'll be back with Segment 2 after this. This is a Ramping Up Your English book review. We have a saying in English, never judge a book by its cover. When I saw the book, Diesel Electric 4030 by Henry Billings being discarded, I thought it had outlived its life. After all, it was written in 1950. Well, that would have been such a loss because the basics of diesel electric locomotives have not changed at all in all these years, and this book's easy-to-read wording and clear sketches make it valuable in understanding the technology that moves trains across our land. Billing takes readers on an imaginary but realistic run between Harmon and Albany, New York. His illustrations show readers how a locomotive works, including how it powers all the train systems. One of my favorite illustrations is the one showing the railroad signaling system and how it works. There's a lot to love in this old book. Getting your hands on one could be tricky. Search your library or used bookstore for a Diesel Electric 4030 by Henry Billings from Viking Press. It's an oldie, but a goodie. For Ramping Up Your English, I'm John Letts. Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English. This is Episode 2, Segment 2. During Episode 1, we left off with a word list, and here it is. These are words that we picked up from the video clip we played in the third segment. The homework was to establish which words we knew and to find the meaning of those words we didn't know. Considering our viewers are intermediate English learners, here are some of the possible findings. Remember, this is just an example. Everyone's assignment will look different, of course. English learners who don't know the word commuter could be stumped here. Watching the video clip again may be necessary to get this one. We'll let it slide and see if it comes up again. I may be pretty certain that the word coal is the same as the Spanish word carbón if I'm a Spanish speaker. That's what this looked like in the video clip, so I'm pretty sure that's it. Freight containers. I saw the containers when hearing these words, so I have a picture in my mind what freight containers means. As we say in English, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Another picture, the man in the funny hat, is there when you hear the word conductor. These are good examples of how context, provided here by video clips, can help you expand your English vocabulary. Keep doing this when you hear or read words that you're not familiar with or you're unsure of. Now we're going to watch a video about freight trains. In this video, we'll learn about train yards and freight containers. Now that we've already seen clips about freight containers, let's see how much you understand of the narration.
You can see the letters BNSF on these locomotives. It stands for the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, the name of the railroad company made up of two railroads that were separate in the past, the Burlington Northern and the Santa Fe. These tracks on the Washington side of the Columbia River are also used to carry half of Amtrak's Empire Builder passenger train. That half of the train leaves Portland and joins with the Seattle, Washington half in Spokane, Washington. There they go to Chicago as one train. The Empire Builder was built by the Great Northern Railroad.
That's the port area over there, obviously. Big old warehouses here, big old cranes to unload the ships.
Poker game going on over there.
And this is the railroad yard. Right
This is the gigantic Oakland Rail Yard in California. The port here receives ships from all over the world. Freight is moved from the ships to the railroad, into the trains, where it's moved east.
So is this the kind of yard your brother worked in?
Yeah,
Here. I can say, you know, Brad Pitt.
this would be the yard.
This is the yard then, huh?
Except that's at Union Pacific, but somewhere
thank you.
Because he didn't.
in here. He was working out of the Oakland yard.
Trains are serviced here, and freight cars are taken off some trains and put onto other trains to take them to their destinations. This huge train yard was built by Southern Pacific Railway Company in the past, but today it belongs to Union Pacific. They bought out Southern Pacific. Union Pacific now owns Southern Pacific Railroad. You can see lots of freight containers, some stacked up to 5 high. Containerized freight is very popular today. Many of these containers are from China, where the United States gets much of its products, things people buy. This large equipment is for taking containers off of ships
and putting them on railroad cars.
The United States takes in, or imports, more products than it sends out, or exports. These products are moved from the West Coast to the rest of the country by train or by truck, and here you can see train cars carrying these freight containers. This freight train has already gone east as far as El Paso, Texas. It's moving slowly through the area of the passenger station. It will pick up speed when it gets out of the city. In many places, there are more than one set of train tracks. That way, more than one train can pass at a time. Train yards can have as many as 50 parallel tracks, or even more.
Right now. Just down the street.
This is a train going through an urban tunnel.
In some freight switching yards, train locomotives have no engineers. They are moved by remote control. While freight trains often go slow in cities, they move fast when they're out of town. These are cars for carrying wood products, known as skeleton cars, because of their appearance when they're unloaded.
In part 3, we'll see inside of a locomotive on Ramping Up Your English from Let's Create Productions. Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English, a program for intermediate level English learners. This is segment 2 of episode 2. I'm John Latz. Our next language function is to describe the function of a thing. We'll describe the function of a train yard. Thinking back on the video clip, we saw many sets of parallel tracks leading to buildings, equipment, and other trains. One of the functions mentioned in this video was that of servicing the trains. Another function was to switch rail cars to send the freight to its destination. Another function in the Oakland, California yard was to take freight containers off the ships and set them onto railroad cars. Here are some sentences that relate these functions of the Oakland train yard. The freight yard is where trains are serviced. The freight yard is where cars are switched to reach their destinations. The freight yard is where cargo containers are moved to rail cars. Now, these are very good, correct sentences relating the functions of a train yard. Let's look at a way of using an equal number of sentences to perform the same function, but at a slightly different level. The freight yard performs multiple functions important to railroads. Trains are serviced there and cars are switched to facilitate movement to their destinations. Additionally, this particular yard contains equipment for lifting cargo containers from ships and placing them on rail cars. These are no more correct than the first group of sentences. They're just at a higher level of register. Don't worry about remembering these. This exercise is an experience in exposure and patterning. We'll get into details later. You're watching Ramping Up Your English. This is episode 2, segment 2. Our language function was using English to describe the function of something. Your homework, if you decide to do it, is to write some sentences in your notebook describing the function of objects in your kitchen. Some ideas might be the stove, the sink, the cabinets. Write these the best you can in your current level of English. And that's it for segment 2. We'll start segment 3 right after this. This is a Ramping Up Your English book review. If you've taken an interest in the theme of trains and railroads, you can grow that interest with Trains magazine. This is for the serious rail fan or just anyone who loves trains. Each issue has a main theme, this one about Western steam engines clearing the tracks of snow and ice. Since the featured events were for photographers, there are incredible pictures in this special winter and holiday issue. This issue also features Union Station in Kansas City, a beautifully remodeled historic train station served by Amtrak's Southwest Chief during its nighttime run between Chicago and Los Angeles. Trains magazine is also a good source of finding railroad museums closest to your home. If you want to know more, visit their website. I found my copy at a newsstand and I just couldn't resist buying it. This has been a Ramping Up Your English book review. I'm John Letts. Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English. This is episode 2, segment 3. In today's previous segments, we've rolled up our sleeves and practiced some basic language functions, exploring ways to ramp them up to higher levels of English. There's some homework from today's program. You're using the phrases is made up of and consists of to describe common objects by naming their parts. Examples might be in your bedroom, your classroom, or your office. You're also writing sentences to describe the function of certain objects. Examples could be the things in your kitchen, like the stove, the sink, and the cabinets. You'll find these assignments on our website. Go to letscreate.org and find the RUE Episode 2 page. Don't worry too much about spelling when you're doing this. You never want to let spelling get in the way of moving forward. We'll cover some basic spelling rules in subsequent programs. For segment 3, we're just going to learn more about our topic for this unit, trains and railroads. Let's see what we can learn. Here's Freight Trains, Part 3 from Ramping Up Your English.
This is a coal train moving through Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Coal is a hydrocarbon used for fuel. It's in big demand by electric power plants. Coal is delivered to the power plant from the mine by freight trains. Coal cars are heavy, and this area of Colorado has mountains, so extra cars are placed in the middle of the train to help get this heavy load uphill. Extra locomotives in the middle or the end of a train are called helpers. This coal train also has helpers on the end. Looking at this small train yard, we see locomotives painted up as Southern Pacific. Union Pacific gained ownership of them when they bought out Southern Pacific Railroad. Here is another huge train yard near Sacramento, California, owned by Union Pacific.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we leave the Roseville station, to the left of the train are the massive freight yards of the Union Pacific Railroad here in Roseville.
Notice all of the buildings. Many of these are shops where train cars are serviced and repaired. And in the past, Southern Pacific used to even make some of its own train cars. Have you ever wondered what a freight train's controls look like inside the cab? This demonstration at a model railroad show in Medford, Oregon, shows what an engineer sees inside the cab of a locomotive. This engineer explains how a freight train is controlled in the mountains of Oregon.
We've got a 60-car freight train, probably weighs about 4,500 tons, something like that. So I've got 5 of these locomotives. So I've got a lot of dynamic braking capability, but I'm going to have to use my air brakes also. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my train first over the top of the mountain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up here, wait for 10 seconds.
You have 5 locomotives, is that what you said?
Yes, I had 5.
So how can you control?
I can control every locomotive in the consist because they're set up. All the air brake controls are connected between each locomotive. And then you've also got a big jumper cable between each locomotive. So I can control the throttles and the brakes on every locomotive. So now what I'm going to do is I'm coming down the hill, so I gradually go into my dynamic brake here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly, as my train tops over the hill, increase my dynamic brake, and what it's going to do is it's going to cause my train, as it comes over the top of the hill, to slowly bunch up. So as the cars come over, they bunch up. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an initial reduction of my air brakes. So now what I'm doing is I'm setting the brakes on the cars. So this is a minimum set, approximately 6 to 8 pounds. And then I'm going to sit here and watch my speedometer and see what my train's going to do. And if I need to give it any more air brake, go ahead and I'll pull this over a little bit more and watch my air gauges. So I take about 2 or 3 more pounds. And what I do now is once I have my air brakes set, I've got my dynamics, I can sit here and basically control the speed of my train just with my dynamic brake now. So if I need to slow my train down, the speed looks like it's going to increase, I'm going to give it more dynamic brake. Come around the curve, the train's going to drag coming around the curve, so I'm going to have to back out a little bit to try and maintain my train speed. Once my train's totally off the mountain now, I can go ahead and release my train brakes, my air brakes, control my train at the speed with my dynamic brake. And when I need to, I'll go completely out of dynamic braking and back into power again.
Hobbyists can control their own trains using a model railroad and remote controls. Look at all the different freight cars on this model train.
There's the caboose.
I grew up in a small town where the Southern Pacific Railroad came through. While stopped at a crossing, I knew the end of the train was coming when I saw the caboose. All freight trains had cabooses back then. The caboose was the rolling office of the train's conductor. He could see the rest of the train from here. In today's computerized world, the caboose came to be seen as an unnecessary expense. As soon as the unions agreed, the railroads took the cabooses off, replacing them with nothing but a red light hung on the last car of the train. In Dunsmuir, California, you can spend the night in a caboose or a boxcar. Just follow the signs from Interstate 5 to the Dunsmuir Railroad Park. I got to spend the night in a caboose from the Santa Fe Railroad. It had a bed and a bathroom, as well as this elevated cupola, where I could sit where countless freight conductors used to sit. While passenger railroad service is only a tiny echo of what it was in the past, freight trains are hauling more and more cargo across the United States. There's more freight carried by trains than ever was before, and railroads are investing huge amounts of money building gigantic train yards and more tracks. Remember, those tracks are private property, and it's against the law to walk on them. It's also very important to stop at rail crossings. I hope you've enjoyed this look at freight trains, and thanks for watching this special feature from Adventures in English. I'm John Letts.
Here's a quick look at a children's book about trains. Freight Trains by Donald Cruz is about as basic as it gets, but it's also a great example of how a theme can support academic learning. A student trying to learn English words for colors would benefit from this book, even though the student may not be interested in anything except trains. I hope you enjoy learning about the description and freight trains. See you next time for episode 3 on Ramping Up Your English. I'm John Letts.
You've been watching Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English language learners. Learn more. Visit our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download today's program at archive.org/details/roadtv. Join us next time on RBTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English.